Hi everyone, welcome to Hot Seat with Cognizant Clay. I am your host, Clayton Terrio. On today's show, I have the honor and privilege of sitting down with one of the world's greatest political satirists. He is dear to many Canadians' hearts and has been making us laugh for over 30 years. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy my chat with Rick Mercer. I'm just going to record here, if you're okay with that, just so I have. Well, first of all, Rick, thank you so much for doing this. I really do appreciate it. I've been a big fan of yours for a while, so it's an honor.
That's very kind of you to say. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, for sure. So during all this COVID-19 craziness, how are you handling it?
I have no complaints. Obviously, like everyone, I have complaints, but I have no real serious complaints. I realize that I'm not suited for this. Like, I'm not enjoying it by any stretch, but I'm not completely ill-suited for it. I think a lot of people, they have to socialize in order to be happy. I realize, I guess I don't have to. And I'm supposed to be writing, so it's a good excuse to write. And I'm glad that I'm in a house and not in the 27th floor of a building.
Yeah.
And a lot of my friends are in those situations, so I have a lot to be grateful for. I'm pretty good.
Yeah, that's good to hear. It's like you say, it's not easy for anybody, but it is what it is. There's not much we can do about it. So
yeah, and I'm not alone. Some people are alone, and that must be very difficult. And my partner cooks, so that's good. So there's a lot to be thankful for.
Oh, good. Well, it's good when they cook for you, right? It's makes it a little easier, that's for sure. So a lot of people, I'm not sure how many people would know this about you, but you first came to attention in 1990. You created and presented a one-man show called Show Me the Button, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What was it like performing by yourself at such a young age?
Well, I think if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have done it. It was one of those situations where I was young and cocky, and I was given the opportunity to go to Ottawa. I'd never spent any time on the mainland. I'm from Newfoundland, and do a one-man show, which I'd never done, about politics in the nation's capital. And I just jumped at the opportunity. And in hindsight, I don't know why. Like I said, it's because I was just cocky enough and young and dumb enough that I didn't really know the consequences. And it worked out. And through a series of events, my play was about the Meech Lake Accord, which you were too young to remember. But that was essentially a constitutional crisis. But when I wrote the play, it was just this kind of quiet Meech Lake Accord thing that was happening. And as the play launched, the Meech Lake Accord exploded and it became a major national issue. And suddenly everyone was talking about it. The press gallery were writing about it. And they would write about this issue, this constitutional issue, then they would mention that this one-man show was happening. And then politicians started showing up and journalists started showing up, and it really exploded as a show. And then through another completely fluky set of events, there was another one-person show that was set to tour all over Canada, and it dissolved. It through no fault of their own, the show just it didn't work. So suddenly all these theaters in Canada had all these time slots, and I took them all. And at the time, I didn't even know that type of thing was unheard of. I just thought, oh, my show is popular, now I'll do a national tour. It doesn't work that way. So, to be successful in show business, I guess you need to be talented to a certain extent, but you certainly need lucky breaks. And that was a big, big lucky break for me.
Yeah, I was doing some reading on it, and it just seemed like everything exploded, like you say. You're young, you're stupid, cocky, whatever you want to call it, and you just, all the attention's on me, cool, right? Like it's...
Yeah, well, it was also, like I was doing this one-man show in Ottawa in a 90 or 80-seat theater that was in an old garage, and then I rolled into Toronto at the Factory Theater, which is a legitimate downtown theater, and I ran for a month and a half. Those things just don't happen. Theaters are booked 2 years in advance. And I was just like, oh, I guess that's what happens. People like my show, I'll go play in Toronto, and then I'll play in Vancouver, and it was a very lucky turn of events.
For sure. Me personally, I've always admired, stand-up comedians, performers. How do you prepare, or how did you, I should say, prepare? How do you prepare to stand up in front of people and perform?
Well, it's interesting you ask that because I'm not really a stand-up, or I've never considered myself a stand-up. I've done small things that are very closely related to stand-up, and the one-man show, I was alone on stage, so you could argue, but it's not really stand-up. But this past summer, I went on past fall, sorry, I went on a stand-up comedy tour with Just for Laughs, and I wasn't just the MC. I had to do 2 20-minute sets of true stand-up, and this was a real challenge for me, and I sought the assistance of a good friend of mine, Greg Eckler, who I write with, but he's a stand-up, and he coached me on how to become a stand-up. I started going to comedy bars, which I had never ever done in my life, and doing open mic nights, and just working the material, and it worked out, and it was very exciting, but it was something that literally I did for the first time, I feel, at age 49.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was a bit of a learning curve. Bit of a learning curve. And I was on the road with tremendous Deborah DiGiovanni. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
My stand-up desk almost collapsed. Deborah DiGiovanni, Ali Hassan. These are the Ivan Decker. These are Sophie Buttle. These are great road-tested stand-ups. So it was nerve-wracking, but it was fun.
For sure. And over the years of performing, have you ever bombed? And if so, how do you overcome that personally?
Yes, I bombed. Everyone has bombed. And sometimes you bomb because the material is wrong. But everyone has the experience of being in a show that's working or having material that works. And then one night it doesn't. And you bomb. And as it's happening, it's a terrible feeling because oh, there's a finish line. But it's not for quite a while. I'm just going to sit up here and bomb. But sometimes it's not your fault. Like sometimes, if you get actors together or comedians, they'll start talking about the worst shows they were in, not the best shows, because those are the funniest stories. And, I've had situations where I was getting ready to go on, and it was a corporate event. So it was a breakfast event, which is tricky. And your job is to get them down over the stairs, and they do their morning session, but like you're the draw to get them down, get them out. And mornings are tough. A lot of conferences because the people in the audience at 7:30 in the morning are probably hungover. And this was a large supermarket chain. I won't say who. And I was getting ready to go on, and it was all the managers from all across Canada. And suddenly they said, "The president is here. The president of the chain is here. He wasn't supposed to speak this morning. He's got to go on, and then you'll go on right after him." Now, they're the people hiring me, so I said, sure, why not? And then the president goes out there, and he goes, "I have our earnings in my hand, and I have a forecast of where this company is going in the next 6 months. And unless drastic changes are made, I can assure you that 75% of you will be unemployed within 2 months." And then turns around and walks off stage. And then they go, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rick Mercer." And then I walk out and I'm like, "Hello, hello." And there's like grown men and women weeping in the crowd. So it doesn't really matter what material you've got prepared. At the time it was like, "Oh, well, did you hear what Jean Chrétien said?" They don't care. They don't care. Their lives are coming to an end. So sometimes you can bomb and it really has nothing to do with you. Or you can show up at a place and, the sound is not there, or there's all sorts of technical problems that can happen. I did a gig last year, and I'm, supposedly a big act, and these things aren't supposed to happen when you've reached the point in my career. And I was going on stage at a university in front of 1,000 people, and there was, in the back, I could see there was a glass opening into the next room over, and there was a Christian rock band playing. And so while I was doing my thing, it was like, "Praise the Lord." Like, you could barely hear me. It's like, I guess, what are we going to do?
Yeah, and that's just it. Like you say, Sometimes it's not your fault. Other times, well, you just go with it.
Sometimes it is your fault, though.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Definitely. There's
That's why you go to the comedy clubs and try out the material, because they can be notoriously difficult audiences. Sometimes it could just be 10 people there, and 6 of those could be there to see a friend. but you only know if your material is going to work by putting it on its feet in front of people. You don't want to be putting it on its feet the first time when you're asking a paying audience in a big theater to hear it for the first time. It doesn't work that way.
Exactly. And if we fast forward to the early to mid 90s, you were one of the creators of This Hour Has 22 Minutes, which is also a little before my time, but as a comedy connoisseur, I've watched quite a bit of it. What was your favorite part about This Hour?
Well, again, what an opportunity to work with three other people, and create a TV show. And really, we had a blank canvas. We had no money, but we had a blank canvas. And it was a very intense period because it was four very different visions of what the show should be. And there was not a lot of crossover between the visions. So there wasn't a lot of common ground. So it was a very intense period. But, through the jigs and the reels, we got the pilot done. And I can remember watching the pilot, which was going to air that night, and thinking, this is the best show I've ever seen. Oh my God. And I'm in it. This show could go forever. I can't believe it. I was like, if this show existed and I wasn't proud of it, I don't know what I would do. It was an incredible feeling, probably the greatest day of my life. And there was so many great memories. And it still runs to this day. I did it for, did I do it for 8 years? Yeah, I did it for quite a while. Yeah, it was great. It was great fun.
Yeah, and it's the political satire is always good in my books. I've always been a fan of that. The curious question there was a petition during the show for Stockwell Day to change his first name to Doris. How did that come about?
Well, this is how old I am now, if you can imagine. Stockwell Day was leader of the Reform Alliance Party, I think they were called at the time. And he floated as a policy this concept that if a certain percentage of the population signed a petition, that would force a legally binding referendum on that issue. Now, most people felt that this was a way to get capital punishment back in the public agenda, probably same-sex marriage, abortion rights maybe. Now, whether that's true or not, people saw it as a way that suddenly we would be faced with all these referendums on socially conservative ideas. And they felt they were socially conservative ideas because Stockwell Day was probably a social conservative. So we figured that's what he was up to. And I think it was, 2% of the population had to sign the petition or something. And my joke was, well, any idiot can get 2% of the population to sign a petition with the internet. I'll be the idiot that proves it's true. And this was just at the beginning of the internet becoming the social tool that it is today. So the idea of getting 2% of the population to sign a petition was such a high threshold because you would need armies of people to go out into supermarkets and public places all across the country to get these signatures. But I thought, well, with the internet, we could probably just do it on a website. But this was so early on. This Hour's 22 Minutes didn't even have a website. Like no TV show in Canada had a website. And no people had websites, not their own. Soon after, everyone had a website. But it was really early goings on. You would read that, Walmart is thinking of opening a website. We'd be like, now everyone has it, of course. So I came up with this idea that we would do the petition online, and the producers went out and bought 22minutes.com. And then they got in bed with this company that was developing a platform for a giant company. I don't know what it was. But anyway, they had built this platform that could handle huge amounts of traffic. But nobody expected us to get huge amounts of traffic. And we launched this petition, and it just captured the imagination of the country. And at one point, 42 people a second were signing the petition. And the thing didn't crash because it was set up for Walmart or something. And suddenly it dominated. I mean, we were in the middle of an election, and suddenly it became the dominant discussion for about, 2 weeks, because everyone was wondering how many signatures will they have? How many signatures will they have? And it became a really big story. It was a lot of fun. It was the first time that something we had done on the show became the news, and it really captured everyone's imagination. And afterwards, someone came to me And they said, this idea of petitions online is a big deal. He was an investor, and he said, I would like to invest in a portal that is just petitions. And he was like, and this was your idea, so I want you involved. And I was like, well, that's ridiculous. This is just, that'll never work. But of course, now we have change.org. That could have been, I could have been in on the ground floor, but.
It's very fascinating. I just found that very, very entertaining that you did that petition, because that's just funny to me.
He changed his theme song to a Doris Day theme song. Like, he tried to embrace it because everyone was calling him Doris wherever he went in the middle of a campaign. I mean, he must have been very, very angry, I would think. But I was a young man,
And then, so after that, as most people do know, the Mercer Report was a household Canadian show for 15 seasons. And even I was in grade 8 when you first started that. And I even remember my teachers in civics showing us episodes of that. And what I wanted to know was what do you miss most about the Mercer Report? And do you ever wish you can go back, or do you think you fulfilled what you needed to?
Well, the show ran a long time. Shows don't run that long. And I felt like we were still doing good shows, but I felt like it had to come to an end naturally. And I think we went out at a good time. There's so much I miss about it. I miss the people that I worked with for 16 years. They're like my work family, so I stay in touch, but it's not the same. And I miss the travel around the country, and I've been thinking about that a lot lately, especially now in these times where travel is prohibited. And just the number of people I would interact with on a daily basis. Someone sent me a note the other day. I think the show was on, at midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning somewhere. And they said they were watching an episode of my show. And he said, well, you couldn't do that show now. We're only 10 minutes in and you've shaken hands with about 112 people, because that's the kind of show it was. And so obviously you couldn't do that right now. But that's what I miss. I miss the incredible amount of travel, and also the interesting people. Like, there's so many people that had a big influence on my life were people that I met on that show. And even though we had lots of famous people and we had prime ministers and we had rock stars, there were a lot of people that weren't household names, and a lot of people who were never on TV before and might never be on TV again. And I felt it was our job to make them look like rock stars. And I think for the most part, we achieved that. And that's why the show ran as long as it did.
For sure. And then that's one thing that I appreciated about it is it's not all about just the famous people. It's treating everybody the same and, getting their name out there. And that's pretty cool. After you were done, what was it hard for you to transition out of it, or do you feel like it was the right time to do so?
It wasn't. I was worried that it would be, because a lot of people said it would be. But by and large, I'm a bit of an introvert. I don't feel like I have to be on stage all the time, and I don't need that validation. So it wasn't that hard a transition. It was strange because you've just been working at a certain pace for so long. But I did have things on my plate that really intrigued me, like the stand-up tour, which was a big, big challenge. And while the Mercer Report was certainly hard work, I would never complain about the amount of hard work it was, because I loved it. But it wasn't challenging in the same way that the stand-up tour was, because the stand-up tour is brand new. The Mercer Report was something we had, I felt, down to a science.
Very true. And like you say, it's really, I think, person dependent. Like, it was easy for you, but for others it might not be. Like you say, being introverted probably, I assume, helps a lot, especially during these times.
There's a lot of people in show business, and I'm not saying this is a judgment, but there's a lot of people in show business and in music and everything else that only feel right when they're on stage. Bruce Springsteen writes about that in his book. I mean, it's the only time he feels normal. This is why he does 6-hour shows, because the rest of the hours in the day, he just doesn't feel right. And I know people like that. I know performers like that. And I'm not one of those people, thankfully, because had I been, it would have been difficult when I got off stage. And everyone has to get off stage eventually. You know, you either leave gracefully, but most of the time you're fired or canceled. That's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Or your record company drops you or whatever. You know, that happens to the best of them. So it's better to be prepared, I think.
For sure. And you made a career out of political satire. Was there ever a time when you considered doing politics for real as a career, or is that just...
No, maybe when I was a kid. But, you know, I am a student of politics, and it was always a big fascination of mine. So I guess you always have it in the back of your mind that, you know, at some point you'll get in there and show them how it's done. Or you've just accumulated a lot of knowledge, like institutional knowledge. Like if you watch politics for 25 years, you feel like when any situation comes along, you feel like you may know how to handle it or not handle it. And I always say it's the same thing as if you're a rabid you know, Blue Jays fan. You kind of think, well, someday, you never know, they just might call me up and ask me to be general manager and I'll have to go in there and fix the team, you know. So I've always, on that level, thought about it, but I have less of an interest now in politics than I ever did before from that point of view.
Correct. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a little segment here that I do with my guests called Rapid Fire. I just ask random questions.
Yeah, I'm terrible at rapid fire, but let's go for it.
We'll try it. Who would be your favorite person from Newfoundland?
Excluding family? My favorite person from Newfoundland? Like, how much trouble is that going to get me in? This is what I've learned as an interviewer. You have to be careful asking questions like, what's a place in this country you hate? Because a lot of people, they'll just answer the question, but then it goes on television, and then the people in that town hate you. So I would never answer that question. If people said, like, what's a province you don't like to visit? I'd say, I love them. I love them all equally. Who's my favorite person from Newfoundland? That's a tough one. Gordon Pinsent.
Well, that's a good answer. What is your go-to meal? What's your favorite thing to eat?
I'm eating a lot of tuna sandwiches these days. But I wouldn't say that's my favorite meal, but it's certainly a go-to for lunch. Tuna salad and a slice of toast.
Yes, definitely. One of my fondest memories from your career is when you interviewed Lieutenant Governor David Onley. Mm-hmm. Being a disabled person, it was very interesting to see such a prominent role played by someone who's disabled. During the interview, you went on a little bit of a joyride on his scooter and you broke the mud flap. Did you ever pay him back for that, or did you go through with your threat at the end of the show and steal his scooter?
I definitely didn't steal his scooter, and I can't tell you with authority whether or not we paid for the mud flap or not. But I will say that over the years, I was responsible for a fair amount of damage on vehicles, and we always took care of it. So I'm sure we took care of the scooter, unless I have no idea what a mud flap on a scooter is worth. He was a great interview. He was a really great interview. I enjoyed that very much.
Yes, he's very, very genuine, I guess is the word I will use. And in high school, he actually invited me to go meet him, and it was just incredible. Like, he's such an open person as well. It's very easy.
Was he lieutenant governor at that point?
Yes, it was his last year of doing so.
Okay.
So it was cool. And last question of it.
We did a tremendous job, and it was great from a visibility point of view. And it's like, I can see you as a young man thinking that that's a big deal that he would get that job. And, you know, for people who may have, you know, just preconceived notions about what someone who uses a mobility device or what have you may be capable of, I think that was a good one.
Very much so. And then the wheelchair isn't us. We are people. It's just, I think a lot of people have preconceived notions that we are limited or restricted for that matter, but it's really not the case, especially with him. While you were growing up during your primary school, were you the class clown type? I wanted to know that.
I don't know if I was the class clown, but I know that I was a disruptive force. And I don't think I was doing that out of certainly wasn't doing it out of malice, but I was a terrible student. I didn't figure out how to work until I started that one-man show. And I think for most of my career, I've been fairly disciplined, and I sit down, I do the work, and I meet the deadlines, and I've always done that. But that's also, knowing those things is how you're successful in school. And I didn't figure that out until after school. So I was just a terrible student. I lacked discipline, and therefore I was a distraction. Maybe I was a class clown. I don't know.
It's a tough one. I was quite the talker in school, and I'd get in trouble all the time.
Yeah, that's all I remember, just constantly getting in trouble for talking. What I was saying, I had no idea, but...
Very true, very true. So I'm just going to get back into the questions here a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a big sports fan, and you have been a huge part of the Paralympics. You went to the 2008 Summer Paralympics in Beijing, as well as the 2010 Whistler Olympics. What was it like to experience the Paralympic Games from a behind-the-scenes perspective?
Oh, it was tremendous. And as you know, over the years, I had many, many Paralympians on the show. If you include teams, it was upwards of 60 or 70 Paralympians on the show, sometimes individuals featured, but sometimes teams. And it was a real go-to for us. It was something that we did from the moment we first set our first Paralympian on. We kept going back to that well. But the truth is, it wasn't out of any altruistic reason on my part that, oh, now I'm going to, do these feel-good moments about Paralympians, because that was never my mandate. The mandate, first and foremost, of the show was to do a comedy show. But we also loved action, anything that delivered action. And athletes are traditionally difficult interviews. I mean, professional athletes are among the most famous difficult interviews there are. They're not inherently inclined to do well in interviews. And amateur athletes are a bit more, but suddenly when I started talking to Paralympians, it was like I had opened Pandora's box, and I found all this gold. Everyone was well-spoken. Everyone had an incredible story to tell. Everyone was doing a sport that people weren't that familiar with. And I just hit it off with each and every one of them. I always had a good time with them. And the sport is incredible, and the people are incredible. And they all had amazing stories. And they're all, in many ways, very inspiring, but they were inspiring because of what they were doing as athletes. Like, I have a friend, who uses a wheelchair, and every now and then he'll tell me that someone will come up to him, like in the supermarket, and just say, like, "You're such an inspiration." And he's like, "Well, I'm just picking up a chicken. Like, I'm not doing anything inspirational right now, other than just being like you." But these athletes did have inspiring stories, and they had a great story to tell. And a lot of times people wouldn't ask them questions that I would think, like, if a guy was missing a leg, I'd say, "How'd you lose the leg?" And sometimes they had a great story, or like a wild story. And they would say afterwards, "I've been interviewed 70 times. No one's ever asked me how I lost my leg." I think, well, seems like the obvious question to me. So I think they appreciated that. I never worried about coming across as any kind of politically incorrect or insensitive. I figured that they would tell me, and I told them straight up, like, if I cross any lines, just let me know. And as a result, I thought we had really sincere, honest dialogue most of the time.
And I think that's very true, and that's, I think you deserve a little bit of credit with that, because a lot of people are so scared to ask things like that. Me personally, dark humor is one of my number one go-tos. So I like questions like that because, like you say, nobody thinks to ask it. They think they're being offensive or whatever it is. And I even remember you with Tildesley doing the swimming. It's like you put the goggles on. You're like, I feel terrible saying this, but I can't see. And it's so genuine and funny to me to see that.
Yeah.
For sure. And
that's what I swam into the side of the swimming pool, because, of course, the swimmers, right, they get bonked on the head as they approach the edge of the pool because they're visually impaired. And everyone is completely blind because everyone's wearing those goggles. So even if you're partially visually impaired, you still qualify for the Paralympics. But to keep everyone on the even playing field, everyone is totally blind. So everyone gets bonked on the head. And my guy didn't bonk me on the head, and I swam into the side of the pool, and I had blood coming down over my face. And, yes, good times.
It's a bit of a battle scar, if you will, right?
Yeah, literally.
What were some of the more, maybe give a few from each winter and summer, but what were you most impressed by the athletes?
Well, it's what it's not just Paralympians; it's Olympians in general.
Yeah.
What I'm always impressed with is the level of discipline that they had and the commitment they had to one thing. And this is the odd thing about elite athletes, that they do one thing to such an extent. Like I would never, ever be able to do that. I just wouldn't have the commitment. But I think that was the most important. And I mean, I don't need to tell you, some of these folks, sometimes they could be in real pain, or they could be really risking their health to compete at the level that they're competing at, because everyone has different disabilities, and yet they were just singularly focused on representing the country and doing as best as they could, and beating the Americans and all that stuff, just like anyone else. And that was impressive. That was super impressive.
Yes, very.
They were also very open and willing to tell their story. And I can think of a lot of them. They were great.
For sure, and that's one thing that's always inspired me about them, is just moving through the barriers and just always having a smile on your face, no matter how much pain or how anxious or sad you can be being disabled. Sometimes it's not easy. And I think everybody can relate to that. Is sometimes you get depressed or down on yourself, and it's I think how you carry yourself through those moments that is most impressive to me about the athletes.
Sure. And I think, the one thing that I've become fairly passionate about is accessibility issues. And that certainly came about as a result of spending time with people who either use a wheelchair or different mobility devices. And I was always amazed. When we would travel, we would have 14 pieces of equipment. And so we had a lot of gear. And we would have to put this gear on dollies, with the wheels, and get them from A to B. And we'd always say, is this going to be a problem with the dolly? And they would say, no. And then really, just so they would know, I'd say, like, this route, is it wheelchair accessible? They'd say, oh yes, the entire hotel is wheelchair accessible. And then, of course, we get 3 corridors away on the route, and suddenly there'd be 3 steps. And he said, I thought you said this was wheelchair accessible. And he said, it's just a couple steps. The rest of it is all smooth. And so, I mean, in a little way, I just pushing that dolly around for all those years, it was so evident how many barriers there are, and for no reason. Quite often they can be easily fixed. Do you know Luke Anderson and Stopgap?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had Luke Anderson on the show, and he has the Stopgap Foundation, and they have this really affordable, quick fix that makes a lot of inaccessible buildings, ground floor buildings, granted, but still there's a lot of them, makes them accessible. And it's a tremendous, tremendous organization. And the way I learned about it was they started showing up on the Danforth, where I live in Toronto. And the diner I went in had one put in, and really this little organization has taken a major commercial street in Toronto and made it easily 50% more accessible than before. It was just a really clever ramp system. And I like them very much. And I'm actually involved in launching it in Newfoundland. And St. John's is a very inaccessible place, partially because, especially downtown St. John's, I mean, it was, it's designed by 18th century cows. Mm-hmm. It's not like someone went out of their way to make it not accessible. There's staircases everywhere, and it's a very inaccessible place. But we're going to do our best, and we're going to open Stopgap in St. John's, and hopefully this summer we're going to see those brightly colored ramps all over the city.
Awesome to hear. That's good for you. Thank you for that. What other initiatives have you been a part of in terms of accessibility?
Well, one that's personal is, and this doesn't impact anyone, but it will someday, is I was always struck by the notion that accessibility is always an afterthought. People always view accessibility as an afterthought so much. It's like, how can we make this building accessible, or how can we do this? And instead of going into it like that. So I built a house, or a small house, a cabin in Newfoundland. And when I was planning the house, I made it completely wheelchair accessible. And it's got ramps on the ocean side of the house. And I can't tell you how many times people see a picture of my place, and they'll say, "Oh, wow, who's in the wheelchair?" I'm like, well, no. Well, a lot of people are in wheelchairs, but I just put a ramp there because you can put one there. So why not? I was building an entire house. Why do I have to wait until someone in my life ends up using a wheelchair and then go, whoa, how am I going to get them into the house? So it's, and it's beautiful. I use the ramp all the time. I use the ramp more than the stairs. It's a nice glide down to the fire pit. And so that's one thing I did in my life. And I think, it'd be nice if more people thought along those lines, but I also realized that I've been fortunate that I got to know so many people who use devices like wheelchairs. So it's more second nature to me. I guess a lot of people, it's not out of malice. They just don't think about it.
Yeah. And that's interesting you say that, because when I was younger, we built a huge wood ramp up to the house. I wasn't in a wheelchair until 12 full time, but right. My mom knew it was coming, so we built it. And then when we sold the house, the first thing they did was get rid of the ramp. And my mom has always said, well, to her, every house should be built with accessibility in mind, because you don't know who's going to need it. And it's, you never know. You could make it to 90 years old and you can't walk anymore.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be, accessibility is going to be the issue of our times, not because of young men like you who are using wheelchairs, but because of baby boomers who suddenly using walkers and suddenly using wheelchairs, not because they had an accident or a condition in their 20s, but because it's just the natural order of things. More and more people will insist on using devices and having accessibility. No, I'm proud of that fact. Like, if you come to my cabin, right, you can roll out the driveway into the front of the house, into every single room. You can go in, you can turn around in the bathroom, and you can roll out on the deck, and you can roll down right to the fire pit. Then you can keep rolling right into the ocean, and then you're on your own. But I just love that. I love being able to say, come on over. Well, I have a great picture. I wish I thought of it to show my father, of my father. So a friend of mine, Scott Jones, is in a wheelchair, and I bumped into him in St. John's, and I didn't know he was going to be in St. John's, and we were in the same hotel, and he said he was down working with a choir. I said, oh, very good. And he said, and my mother's here for the first time, and we're going to, look around and see the city a little bit. I said, oh, that's very good. And the next day I was down talking to my father, and I said, oh, and I met this old friend of mine. He's never been to St. John's. He brought his mother, and they're going to look around. And I said, actually, they don't have a car, so I'm going to drive them around, show them a few sights. And my father said what he always says. He said, well, you should, when you go down to see the beach, because the beach near my parents' house is on the 5-cent tour, he said, you should pop in for a cup of tea. I'd love to, a slice of bread. And Dad and Mom very hospitable, and they always make that offer to anyone. And I said, well, we can't do that because Scott's in a wheelchair and he can't get in the house, So, but anyway, I'm sure he'd appreciate it, maybe another time. So the next day, I went down to the house, and Dad had the screen door off, and he had the front door open, and he had these two big bloody giant boards that he had around the property for years. He had a giant ramp built up the front of the house, and I said, what are you doing? He said, well, just in case, your friend Scott wants to come in for a cup of tea. So sure enough, we went in for a cup of tea, and we wheeled Scott in. I mean, it was pretty dodgy, but anyway, he managed to get in, and so we had a nice lunch. And then in the next year, my father, he had built a wheelchair ramp for a friend of his who no longer needed it, and they sold the house. And much like your experience, the ramp system was taken off the house, but my father interceded and got the ramp, and now my parents' house have a full wheelchair ramp on the side of the house, so it's fully accessible.
Well, there you go. Then that's like you say, that's very proactive, and you being able-bodied, not many people have your perspective at all. They either don't think of it or they don't think they'll need it, and that's, you never know when you're going to need it. That's for sure.
Oh, sure. And I remember when I was building the cabin, it's only got 2 bedrooms. And there was, at one point I was talking to the guy who was building it for me and stuff, and he said, it's a step down, but it's only a little step down. And I said, no, there can't be any step downs. Like, there can't. And he's like, well, the other bedroom's accessible. I'm like, there can't be a step down. He's like, it's this far. I'm like, wheelchair accessible. Like, sure, I know it's possible. And eventually, okay, Mr. Wants everything to be flat. And yeah, we got it done.
Well, and 2 inches may as well be 10 feet.
Well, that's what people don't know, right? Especially, yes. I mean, for some people like my friend Scott, he can do 2 inches because he's a paraplegic and he can bounce that thing all over the place. But if you're in a motorized chair, you're not doing 2 inches. And depending on, no.
No, I'll get stuck, and I've tried before, and the mid wheels just spin. You're not going anywhere.
Do you have like a bit of an off-road wheelchair too?
Yeah, it's a little bit, but about 1.5 inches, maybe right. 2 inches down, but 2 inches up, just it wouldn't happen. I'd get stuck.
Right.
And these things are about 450 pounds, so I don't think anyone's lifting it.
I have no idea how heavy those things are. They're really heavy.
Oh yeah. There's no way you're lifting it. Other than that, I was doing some research, and this is more charity than it is accessibility, but you're the co-chair of Spread the Net, which is an initiative to buy bed nets for children in Africa to prevent the spread of malaria. How did you come about starting that?
I interviewed Belinda Stronach, who was at the time a Canadian politician, again, probably before your time, but she was a conservative politician who eventually crossed the floor and became a liberal. But I interviewed her while she was a conservative, and we talked about, there was a fellow who was on her advisory team when she was running for leader, and he was a guy, Jeffrey Sachs, and I just read his book, and it was about Africa. And I said, how do you know Jeffrey Sachs? And she said she met him a number of times, and she said, I'm thinking of going with him, following him when he does a trip across Africa. You should come sometime. Maybe you could come. I said, oh yeah, sure. And Belinda is a very wealthy woman, and I thought that's just the type of thing wealthy people say, like, oh, we're going on a trip, you should come. I just thought, whatever, it's never going to happen. And then she called me the next summer out of the blue, and she said, I'm going to go follow Jeffrey Sachs, and you're more than welcome to tag along. So I went, and we visited. It was a profound trip because you go from visiting places with tremendous wealth. I mean, we were in one president's house, and it was like everyone had gold hats and stuff. It was just bonkers. And then other places where there was just profound poverty. And I said to Belinda before I left, I said, when I come back, I'm not going to be one of those people that doesn't shut up about fundraising for Africa. I'll go on the trip, but that's not me. And she was like, fine. And we were visiting areas where there was nothing. Like, there was literally no economy. There was nothing. There was just poverty like you cannot even imagine. And destitute, and also no children around. And it was terrible. Then you notice, like, there's no children around. And then you go to the next community. It could be 100 kilometers down the road. And you go into a community and you notice, oh, there's children playing, and there's corn growing, and there's, they seem to have a school over here, and they seem to have this and that. And I asked Sachs, like, what's the difference? And he said, well, the first community doesn't have protection against malaria. So malaria comes, it kills the children, which devastates the community. People are sick. They're not able to work. The trickle-down effect is immense. And the second community had bed nets. And so Belinda said, well, I guess when we go back to Canada, we'll have to figure out a way to buy a lot of bed nets. And that seemed like the sensible thing to do. And so we started Spread the Net. And now we're partnered with Plan Canada. Now it is a Plan Canada initiative. They run it. I no longer have a leadership role, but certainly I've supported it over the years, and a lot of school kids have bought a lot of nets. It's good. And they work. I've seen them work.
Wow, yeah, I didn't know that how well they did work until I did some research on it, and it's quite amazing. And like you say, unless you go there and see it for yourself, you can't imagine how destitute they really are. And it's great to make a difference, like.
And again, we did buy a lot of nets over the years, but the big driver was the Spread the Net Challenge that I was doing on the show. And I didn't buy those nets. That was school kids and university kids all across the country. They're the ones who did the heavy lifting. I just showed up with the camera. So they did the hard work for sure.
Definitely. And one of the other main things you did was the 1 ton challenge in 2004, and all of the proceeds went to Casey House, which is a hospice in Toronto supporting people with AIDS, which is another big one. What kinds of work did you do with them, and what reactions did you get from the people you were helping?
I've never done a lot of work for Casey House. I fundraised for Casey House a bit, and I in my personal life, I support them. The 1 ton challenge was, it was a government program, and they wanted a spokesperson. And so I agreed to do it because I believed in the program, but I felt it was getting a little dodgy for me as a satirist to be accepting money from the government to promote a government program, even though I wanted to promote the government program. So that's why to make it clean, I just wanted to make it clean. And I didn't want people to say, oh, he's in the pocket of the government. Look, he got paid to do this commercial. So that's why I just gave them the money. And, it's an AIDS hospice, for God's sake, so they need money.
Yeah, and why not? Like, that's something that definitely needs the money. And like you say, why not? Like, you don't want to look shady working for the government, but at the same time, it's great.
Yeah, so I haven't done much for Casey House, but, sometimes in my line of work as well, people will say, can you do this for us? And we'll give you this much money. You could donate it to a charity of your choice. And so that's great. That's a great way of doing things. And so I had the list, like everyone does. I mean, most Canadians have charities they support. And so sometimes, it looks like I've done a tremendous thing for a charity, but actually, I haven't really done that much at all. I just did, I might have appeared at a benefit or done something professionally. And then as a result, this money was made available to me to give to someone else. So that's what you do.
Exactly. And the last one I thought was very, very good cause is the It Gets Better campaign, where you speak to lesbian and gay youth to help them cope with bullying and it just the time, like the trouble that comes with coming out. What were some of the more memorable moments during that for you?
Well, that was a dodgy one because It Gets Better, I think was I think it's a really good initiative. I can see why some people criticize it, but I'm a very private person. I mean, I can't even, it's only because of this pandemic. It's the first time I've ever done a Skype interview or a Zoom interview. It's only been since it started because I would just say, no, I'm not doing it. I don't want anyone to see anything in my house. And I've never shot anything in the house. Now things are different. So, but my point is, I'm generally a pretty private person. So I was never really that keen on discussing my sexuality or my marriage or anything like that. I never liked it when someone would call up and say, we're doing a car column. What kind of car do you drive? I'd be like, oh, now you're asking some pretty personal information. But I think around It Gets Better, and also there was a young man, Jamie Hubley, who took his own life in Ottawa, and he was a victim of bullying. He tried to open a gay-straight alliance. I just thought it's important for people like me to make it clear and be visible. And not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice because of the Jamie Hubleys out there. And much the way you said as a young man, when Onley was the LG, and there you are using a wheelchair, and he uses a motorized scooter, and you go, wow, oh, I guess I could do that. Or I'm not limited because by my disability, because look what he did, he can do that. So I thought it was important that gay kids could look and see gay cops and gay politicians and gay TV personalities and gay athletes. Please, we need a gay hockey player. It'll happen. I mean, they're there. Believe me, I know they're there. But, it's all about not being a role model, but being visible.
Exactly.
For the longest time, for gay kids, they feel like they're the only one in the world that feels this way, and so it's important for people to say, no, actually, that guy running for the president of the United States, he's gay too. You're like, oh, he's running for president. That's pretty good. Exactly,
and it's like you say, you shouldn't have to struggle with it, but unfortunately, the stigma's there, and you're not doing it to be inspiring or whatever. You want it to be a visible thing. And I remember reading a quote that you said, I'm doing this for the gay young man in Flin Flon, or whatever city you want to say. I'm doing it to show him that he's no different, and there's nothing wrong with it. And I think it's getting better, which is ironic because it's called It Gets Better, but I still think there's a lot more to go still.
Well, the whole point of It Gets Better was, I mean, a lot of people did it. It was just basically adults saying, yeah, it gets better, because it's an acknowledgement that for a lot of young people, they're not in a very good way. Like they're getting bullied, or they're not getting support from their families, and so, it's important for adults to tell them that they related to them and it gets better. At the same time, all of us involved were very cognizant of the fact that it's one thing to say to a 12-year-old, don't worry, it gets better. When they're looking at when I'm 20, like that's a lifetime away, especially when you're 12 years old. So the idea of saying it gets better, and even in 6 months, I mean, that again is a lifetime. So it was important that we not just do it gets better, that we also made concrete moves to make it better now versus kicking the can down the road.
Right. Very true. And you just set the wheels in motion. The last little thing I wanted to touch on was, obviously during this shutdown, it's hard for people to keep the awareness going. How do you recommend people keep the awareness for disabilities, or whatever charity they support, or specifically right now, COVID-19 relief? How do you recommend we continue to keep the ball moving?
It's a tricky time because there's really only one story. And, people are, by and large, Canadians are charitable and they support charities, and you can see that they're responding to the immediate demands that have come about because of this pandemic, especially when it comes to food banks and homeless shelters and things like that. But at the same time, people are stretched in a way that they have never been stretched. Many people, and they've lost a lot of money, or they're getting reduced wages, and I mean, we all know the story. So it's difficult, and it's a difficult time. It's like basically like this pandemic is taking all the oxygen out of the room. So it's hard to get people to talk about accessibility issues, or talk about green spaces, or everything, because COVID is taking all the oxygen. But that can't continue forever. And so it's important for people like you, or people who support various causes, to just stay with it. Like I said, we're going to launch Stopgap in Newfoundland, and I'm not that involved, but I know Newfoundlanders, they're generous people, and I know that under normal circumstances, you could call up any business and say, I want to talk to you about Stopgap and doing this and doing that. And this week, a lot of businesses might be like, what? I can't take this call right now. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. But we have to acknowledge that, but at the same time, just keep moving forward.
Exactly.
Going away. None of these issues that are important, none of them are going away because there's a pandemic. But some of them are put on hold for the time being.
Yes, on pause, so to speak. Well, as someone who is high risk, I just wanted to extend my thank you to you and all the other famous Canadians for helping with the Stronger Together Canada, because that to me is very important to, let people watch something that is positive. And I just wanted to thank you and everybody else for doing that, because I look forward to it.
That's very kind of you. But I think, you mentioning you're high risk as well. I think that that's something that can't be said enough because, I did a rant on the flu shot, like on the show. I didn't really know what to rant about it. And anyway, there was a free flu shot offered down the hall from my office. So I was like, oh, good. And I always got a flu shot. And I said, I'm going to the flu shot, free flu shots down the hall. And the guys I work with, they're like, oh, yeah, okay. And then, I went and got my flu shot. And I was like, yeah, they're still down there, the free flu shot. And there was no one going. And I said to one of them, a guy I've known forever, I was like, you're not getting the flu shot? And he said, I don't trust the science. I was like, I've never heard you talk about science ever. Like, he's not a guy who's in the corner reading Science Digest. He's reading Maxim magazine. Now, suddenly, he doesn't trust the science. And so when I did this rant about the flu vaccine, everyone should get the flu vaccine. Boy, we got so much pushback. But I felt the biggest argument, or the strongest argument you can make for getting the flu shot is pointing out that people are at risk. Because so many people are like, I think I can get the flu. I'll be okay. You're like, yeah, because you're a 28-year-old athlete. But your grandmother, right, or your next-door neighbor. And how many people are compromised? Like, when you think about this during this pandemic, I think if most people do an inventory of the people they love and really think about it, they'll realize that a lot of them are compromised. They could have been a cancer survivor. They could have had they could have diabetes. There's a whole host of things where they don't necessarily think of the person as compromised, but they are. And, yourself, they might think, well, he's in a wheelchair, but he's not compromised. You go, well, actually, he is, right? So it's important that we think about that, and that's why, we're staying indoors out of it.
Exactly, and it's what we need to do. You hit the nail on the head there. Is I think if people stopped and looked around, they would take it more seriously, and it's scary. It really is. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm nervous about it.
Well, and you're allowed to be nervous about it, but all you can do is make sure that everyone in your bubble is playing by the rules. And if someone's not playing by the rules, then they have to leave the bubble. That's it. You can't have, and there's a lot of cheating going on, and I know there is, and I don't think there's a lot, but there certainly is, and people are frustrated, and but we have to remain vigilant, as they say.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah, it's if more people listen, we'd get out of it quicker and less harmed, I guess. That's about all I can think of, but
I think Ontario's doing well. Newfoundland's doing a really good job of flattening the curve. Newfoundland, there was an incident early on when social distancing was just becoming a thing, and a woman was positive, and she went to a funeral home and a wake and then a funeral, and it's called the Calls Cluster, and this one woman was responsible for inadvertently. Was responsible for 120 people testing positive. That's one person. So I think when in Newfoundland, once everyone knew that, they started taking it very seriously, more so than I think in other parts of the country, because they were just so freaked out that one person at a funeral could do that. And so stories like that are important that people hear them because, it's that serious.
Very much so. I did hear about that. That was on the news. That was all over the news here.
When was the last time you were out of your house?
Pardon?
When was the last time you were out of your house?
Oh, jeez. Like close to the beginning of March, pretty much.
Right.
But
can you get out for a spin around the block?
I have a few times, yeah, but other than that, not really. I've always been very much a homebody. I'm an extrovert, but I stay home a lot. So it's not really anything new to me. And I think I've almost got the advantage in a way because I'm used to it. I find a lot of people are getting cabin fever, and it's hard to stay home for more than a month. But me personally, I've taught myself, you know what, there's nothing you can do about it, and it's not worth the risk of attracting the virus because I don't think I would come out of it. I think it would be probably fatal for me, and I think that's a huge I don't know what to say, like
Well, it's certainly an incentive.
yes, that incentive would be the word. It's very, very much a reality check,
Mm-hmm.
how delicate I really am. And but I'm grateful. Like I say, I'm talking to you right now. I don't know if that would be possible if it wasn't for this.
Right. Oh, yeah, I would have talked to you anyway.
Well, that's good to hear. Well, Rick, that's about all I have for you. Thank you so much again for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, and you stay safe and stay blessed.
You too. Stay in that bubble.
Yeah, I will.
Cheers.
All right, Rick, have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.